At exactly 3:23 a.m. in the black waters west of the Philippine Sea, a sonar operator aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer froze over his screen. Something deep below the ship had appeared without warning, moving too fast for debris, too controlled for a whale, and too quiet for anything the crew wanted to be real. Then it changed course and began closing in. The sea that night looked calm from the bridge. No storm, no heavy swell, no lightning on the horizon. Above the surface, everything felt almost routine. The carrier strike group had been moving in disciplined formation for hours, cutting through the darkness with lights reduced and sensors alive. At the center of that formation was a U.S. aircraft carrier, a floating airfield surrounded by destroyers, cruisers, escorts, helicopters, and layers of overlapping defense. On paper, it was one of the most protected military formations on Earth. But paper does not matter at sea, because beneath the surface, the ocean hides everything. The destroyer on the outer screen had been listening more than looking. Its radar watched the sky. Its electronic warfare systems scanned for emissions. Its combat information center tracked the rhythm of the task force in glowing symbols and moving lines. But the most important battle station that night was sonar. The ocean was dense, dark, and full of false echoes. Thermal layers bent sound in strange ways. Propeller noise could vanish. Entire submarines could disappear into bands of colder water and wait like hunters inside a blind. That was why the initial report came quietly. Possible contact, bearing 087, deep, intermittent. Speed increasing. At first, no one panicked. Sonar operators are trained not to fall in love with a ghost. The sea produces ghosts constantly. Machinery noise, seafloor reflections, biological clutter. Even the ship's own movements can create patterns that look threatening for a second and then fade into nothing. So the team did what professionals always do. They checked the signal, rechecked the signal, narrowed the beam, compared passive returns, looked for cavitation, looked for consistency. The contact stayed there. Then it accelerated again. Within seconds, everything changed. The destroyer's captain was called to combat. The carrier group commander was alerted. Course predictions began flashing across screens as analysts tried to understand what they were seeing. The contact was still submerged, still quiet, angry, and still behaving in a way that made everyone deeply uncomfortable. It was not wandering, it was not drifting, it was moving with intent. And it was moving toward the strike group's inner screen. What the crew didn't realize at that moment was that this single contact was about to trigger one of the most tense underwater confrontations the formation had faced in years. Orders moved fast. The destroyer adjusted course to place itself between the underwater contact and the carrier. Another escort ship widened its screening arc. An MH-60R Seahawk helicopter was prepped on the flight deck for immediate launch, armed with sonobuoys and lightweight anti-submarine torpedoes. Overhead fighter jets already airborne on night patrol were quietly redirected, not because they could attack something underwater, but because if this contact was connected to a larger hostile move, the sky might become dangerous next. That is the terrifying logic of naval warfare. A submarine contact is never just a submarine contact. It can be a scout, a decoy, a screen for something bigger, a lure to pull ships out of position, a signal that missiles, aircraft, or fast attack craft are already moving somewhere beyond the horizon. And then the impossible happened. The contact vanished. No breakup, no fade, no gradual loss. It was simply there. And then it was gone. Inside the combat center, the silence got heavier. Sonar men know that losing a contact can be worse than detecting one. When you have a track, you have options. You can classify it, shadow it, box it in, force it away. But once it disappears beneath thermal layers or into a blind zone, the initiative changes hands. Now the unseen object decides the distance. It decides the angle. It decides what happens next. The destroyer slowed just enough to improve acoustic conditions. The helicopter launched into the night, its rotors chopping across the darkness as it raced ahead of the formation. Moments later, the first string of sonobuoys splashed into the sea, each one a temporary electronic ear drifting in black water. Their data began feeding back to the task force. For a few minutes, nothing. Then one buoy caught a faint transient. Another caught it too. The operators triangulated the return and stared in disbelief. The contact had not fled. It had circled wide and moved behind the destroyer screen, angling toward the carrier's projected path. That was no accident. Now the situation had a shape, and the shape was bad. The tactical picture suggested a highly disciplined underwater platform, something with advanced quieting, strong situational awareness, and the confidence to maneuver inside a U.S. naval defensive perimeter. That narrowed the possibilities fast. This was no fishing vessel, no civilian submersible, no drifting equipment. If the track was real, then somewhere beneath those waters was either a modern attack submarine or an unmanned underwater vehicle operating with military precision. The crew did not yet know which possibility was more alarming. A submarine meant a human commander had chosen to get dangerously close to a carrier strike group. An unmanned vehicle meant someone might be testing a new kind of warfare entirely. But what happened next shocked everyone. A second contact appeared, then a third. Not close together, one not in formation, spread apart, faint, and staggered. It was as if the ocean floor itself had awakened. Suddenly, the tactical problem changed from one intruder to multiple underwater returns, each one intermittent, each one difficult to classify, each one capable of forcing the strike group into defensive maneuvers. The carrier's escorts began recalculating torpedo threat sectors. Decoy systems were armed. Anti-torpedo protocols were reviewed. Missile cells and close-in guns were irrelevant here. Billions of dollars of firepower above deck meant almost nothing if the real danger was 200 feet below, moving silently through warm, salt water. This is the part most people never see in movies. Naval power feels invincible when aircraft carriers launch fighter jets and destroyers bristle with missiles. But underwater, any power becomes vulnerability. A single torpedo, launched from the right angle at the right moment, can cripple a warship, shatter a formation, and turn a strategic patrol into an international crisis before sunrise. The strike group commander faced a brutal decision. Maintain course and risk drifting into a submarine engagement envelope, or alter formation in a way that would reveal the group had detected a threat. Either choice carried consequences. In contested waters, even a defensive movement can be watched, recorded, and interpreted as a message. Meanwhile, the Seahawk helicopter began a more aggressive prosecution pattern. More sonobuoys dropped. Data accumulated. Still, the returns came and went like shadows. One moment they suggested 3 independent objects, the next maybe only one with a confusing acoustic signature. Then, a sharp broadband transient flashed across one of the channels, the kind of burst that makes every anti-submarine officer sit up straight. Possible launch transient. No one said the word everyone was thinking: torpedo. The destroyer did not wait to debate. It deployed acoustic countermeasures and increased speed. The formation shifted. Another escort moved to cover the carrier's flank. An airborne P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft, already operating farther out, was called in to support the search. High above, the aircraft's sensors began sweeping for anomalies on the surface, while feeding the growing underwater picture back to the fleet. Seconds stretched. Then sonar reported something strange. The supposed launch track was not converging on the destroyer or the carrier. It was moving across them, then away, then stopping abruptly. That made no tactical sense for a torpedo. Torpedoes commit. They close. They hunt. This object seemed to hesitate. Then something unexpected happened. From the helicopter's sensors came a clearer return at shallow depth. And for the first time, the picture stopped looking like an attack profile and started looking like confusion. The contact was small, much smaller than a full-sized attack submarine. Its acoustic fingerprint was wrong for a conventional manned platform. No consistent shaft rotation, no clear propeller blade rate. Instead, there were bursts of quiet electric propulsion, periods of drift, then sudden corrections. It wasn't a submarine. At least not the kind anyone had first imagined. The destroyer's analysts began piecing together a different possibility. What they were tracking could be an unmanned underwater vehicle, perhaps one of several, operating semi-autonomously. Small, quiet, difficult to classify, and dangerous for exactly that reason. Such systems could map routes, collect acoustic signatures, lay sensor nodes, shadow formations, or even act as decoys to expose anti-submarine tactics. And if armed, even in a limited way, they could pose a serious threat out of all proportion to their size. Suddenly, the earlier disappearances made sense. So did the multiple returns. They might not have been 3 submarines at all. They might have been a network, a mesh of underwater drones. That realization hit hard, because it suggested this was not an isolated encounter. It suggested preparation. Somewhere, someone may have already seeded these waters with machines designed to wait in silence until a carrier strike group passed overhead. The Seahawk moved in lower, dropping a final pattern of buoys and marking the strongest contact. The destroyer prepared to engage if ordered. Every step was now measured against a larger geopolitical reality. Destroying an unidentified underwater vehicle in contested waters might be tactically justified. It might also become a strategic headline in minutes. If the object belonged to a rival state, the consequences could ripple far beyond the ocean. And still, no one on board could answer the most important question. Was this surveillance? Or was this the opening move of something larger? As dawn remained hours away, the strike group executed a subtle but deliberate shift in formation. The carrier turned slightly south. Escorts expanded their screen. Airborne assets widened their search boxes. The change looked minor on paper, but it forced the underwater contact to reveal intention. If it continued to pursue the carrier's new path, that meant tracking. If it broke away, perhaps it had already completed its mission. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the strongest contact surged. Not toward the destroyer, not toward the carrier, toward a narrow gap between the screening ships. The helicopter crew watched the data update in real time. The object accelerated through the gap, then slowed, as if reacting to the sudden complexity of the acoustic environment. That hesitation gave the Americans the clearest track of the night. Enough for classification, enough for engagement parameters, enough for a decision. But before the order could be finalized, the contact went dead. Completely dead. No propulsion, no maneuvering, no noise. The underwater vehicle had either shut itself down, settled on the seabed, or scuttled. Search patterns continued for another hour, then another. By first light, 2 of the weaker contacts had also disappeared. Surface lookouts found no debris, no oil, no wreckage, no buoyant casing. The ocean, as always, kept its secrets. Officially, the event would be logged as an unresolved underwater contact incident involving probable unmanned systems. Unofficially, every officer in that strike group understood what had just happened. Someone had reached under the shield. Someone had touched the perimeter of one of America's most powerful naval formations without firing a missile, without surfacing a submarine, and without ever fully revealing themselves. That was the real shock. Because the old image of naval confrontation is loud and visible. Carrier decks roaring with fighter jets, vertical launch systems firing missiles into the sky, radar screens filled with incoming threats. But the future may not announce itself that way. It may begin in silence, with a small underwater machine no larger than a torpedo casing, drifting near a shipping lane, cataloging the sound signatures of destroyers and carriers, waiting for the night when those sounds matter most. By sunrise, the strike group was still intact. No ship had been hit, no torpedo had detonated, no shots had been fired. Fighter jets recovered to the carrier deck. The Seahawk landed low on fuel. Reports flowed up the chain of command. Analysts on shore would spend days comparing acoustic fragments, satellite passes, regional vessel movements, and intelligence intercepts, trying to identify who had placed those machines there and why. But for the sailors who were there, the outcome felt less like victory and more like warning. They had responded fast. Their training held. Their layered defenses worked. The carrier remained protected. The escorts did exactly what they were built to do. Yet beneath that professional success was an unsettling truth. The ocean battle space had changed faster than most people realized. Not with a dramatic explosion, not with a declaration of war, but with a question. If an unmanned underwater system could penetrate that close during a tense patrol, what else was already down there? Sensor chains on the seabed? Look, sleeper drones near choke points? Autonomous decoys designed to trigger defensive reactions and map American tactics in real time? And if those systems were networked to submarines, bombers, anti-ship missile batteries, or coastal surveillance units, then the next naval crisis might begin long before the first headline appears. That is what makes the story so disturbing. The crew expected danger from the horizon and the sky. Instead, the most serious threat came from below. From a place no one can watch directly and no camera can fully reveal. In that darkness, strategy becomes patience. Technology becomes invisibility. And a single unexplained contact can force admirals to think like chess players in a room with half the board missing. Somewhere in the vast Pacific, perhaps on a submarine, perhaps at a shore command station, perhaps inside an intelligence center far from the sea, someone may have been listening to the same encounter unfold, learning from every American turn, every sonar ping, every helicopter drop, every defensive adjustment. That possibility may be the most chilling part of all, because maybe the purpose was never to sink a ship,